It's been a long time coming, but it's finally here. Today we get to unbox and take a closer look at the all-new ARRMA Kraton 8S. Hey, it's Vas here from Aussie Playground and welcome to a very special unboxing. And yes, it has been a very long time coming, but finally we are here. We have ourselves the all-new ARRMA Kraton 8S. This is an absolute beast capable of 55 plus miles an hour, and I have no doubt that it'll hit those speeds because pretty much every other ARRMA car that has been released has hit the claimed speeds. Now this thing is monstrous. As you can tell, the box is almost as tall as I am, and I'm just on 6 foot tall. ARRMA is claiming this to be a 1/5 scale. I'm a little bit iffy on that one. I'm going to let you guys battle that one out in the comments, but no doubt this is a huge car. Now it does come with a 4685 1250 kV brushless motor, has 160 amp firmer smart technology ESC from Spectrum. Also has a 40 kilogram steering servo. No longer are we using the old 15 kilogram steering servos on this one. And of course it comes with a DX2E radio, which will help you control AVC, which this car is equipped with. It is available in the green and an orange. And I'll just kick the box just slightly out of shot because I don't want to trip over it later. So we have our radio right here. We have our instruction manual and so forth. And of course we have the beast itself. We will get to that in a minute, but first let's get these little things out of the way really quickly because there's not a lot here, but there are a couple of new things that you probably haven't seen before. One is this sort of like what is it? A socket wrench type thing, which is of course to take out the wheels of the car. This does have 24mm hexes, which I believe is pretty standard for 1/5 scale vehicles. So nice that ARRMA have included that for us to be able to remove the wheels. We also have this funny looking tool here. Now this isn't to pick your nose with or anything like that. This is actually to remove an E-clip, or I think it's called more like a C-clip, that's holding the bearings at the end of the front, like the center drive shafts in the front and rear diffs. I'll show you this a little bit later on as well. So this is an important tool. Make sure you hold on to that. And then they give you these little bits here, which are part of the sway bar, which this does not come with included. I believe that these may have been part of some mold of a part that comes with the car, and they figured, well, we may as well include that with the car. So that's why we got these, but the car itself does not come with sway bars pre-installed. So that goes over there. Now in here we also have a sticker sheet. ARRMA have actually been including some sticker sheets with a lot of their newer cars, but note that there's only 3S and 4S printed on here. I'm sure that ARRMA will update that in the future, but for now you might need to put 3S on either side of the car and 4S on either side of the car, because if you run 6S or 8S, that's how you do it. Plus this has twin battery trays, no longer a single battery tray, so kind of makes sense. Now this little leaflet here, this is actually your exploded view of the entire car, and it actually gives you part numbers for everything as well. So make sure you hold on to this in case you need anything. There is pinion sizes, so optional pinion sizes that you can get. There's also the rest of the sway bar kit that's included in here. We've also got information regarding the center diff, front and rear diffs, shocks, and there's also an optional stone guard that you can purchase for this car as well. And then of course when you open it up, you have the entire exploded view of the car right there with all the parts. Now I will warn you, it's going to be a little bit like Where's Wally when you're looking for a particular part, because I was looking for a particular part in here. It took me a little while, but rest assured that I'm pretty sure like 99.9% of all parts will be listed on that exploded view. So moving on to the all-important user manual. And you guys know I've said this many times before, especially most recently, to make sure you read through your manuals, or at least glance through them. Make sure that there's no information in there that you perhaps are not familiar with. Every car is a little bit different. This one here is no exception. It shows you the ESC settings and how this comes equipped out of the box. And then the rest of the pages is mainly like how to set up the car, how to turn it on, install batteries, yada, 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 all that type of stuff. And then it goes into diff maintenance, shock maintenance, tire maintenance, you know, how often should you maintain this and change the oil and do all that sort of thing. Gear mesh, all of these sorts of things are included in here, as well as on one of the last pages, it talks about covering the breather holes that are on the wheels of the car and puncturing a hole on the tire if you are planning to run this through water. Because the breather holes on the wheels, if you go through like puddles of water and stuff, water will get into your tires, you know, into the foam, and it'll wreck your wheels. So always make sure you seal up those holes first, put a couple of holes on the actual tire itself, and then you're good to go. But make sure you do the holes properly, because if you don't, you could actually end up tearing the tire as you're using it. So just be mindful. DX2E. This is the radio that's included. Of course, the car does come with AVC pre-installed. You got a little knob on the front here, which will help you adjust that. And then you've got, you know, your steering trim, throttle trim, on and off switches, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a throttle limiter switch up the top here, so you can actually turn it down or turn it up, depending on, you know, who's handling the car or how fast you want to go. These aren't bad radios as far as how they're equipped. I'm not a big fan of the feel of them, that's all. But other than that, they come equipped really, really well. And of course, you can put attachments on these so that you can have like a Bluetooth app going through your phone, you get telemetry and all that sort of thing. Kind of cool. I'm going to be using this one with my DX5C. I've got the radio, I may as well use it, right? Finally, we're here. The big beast itself. I'm going to give you a little warning right now. I'm not going to be bringing this car up to the camera very often. This thing weighs over about 11 kilos or so on a good day. And as you can probably tell, I haven't been to the gym in a while. You can probably guess how long it's been. But for me to be bringing this thing up to the camera all the time, we're going to have to take a few breaks. I don't want to do that. I've spent a lot of time doing a lot of overlay, you know, B-roll footage to give you guys some close-ups of this car. So we'll be doing that. But for the moment, I will bring it up to the camera. And I will give you the traditional spin around that I always do. My God, holding this thing out with outstretched arms is not fun. Okay, here we go. Oh God, I nearly dropped it. There we are, all right. And underneath, look at that beautiful chassis. Look at this thing. It is an absolute beast of a machine. I mean, that gives you an idea of how big this thing actually is. It's heavy, okay? It's heavy. All right, so a couple of things worth noting. We're going to start with the tires first of all. These are the Copperhead 2 SB, which I asked ARRMA about, and they say that SB is small block. Don't know why. That's what it is. Apparently, maybe to scale, they're a little bit smaller than, I don't know. So Copperhead 2s, these actually feel pretty good. I am a little bit worried about the actual base rubber of the tire itself. Like the knobbies and everything feel fantastic. The tire compound feels really good. I'm just worried that the actual tire itself might be just a fraction too thin. But I could be totally wrong. ARRMA's probably watching this going, no, what are you talking about? But that's probably the only concern I have with this. Other than that, tires feel great. Suspension wise, look, it's kind of hard to tell. If I'm going to be honest, it's kind of hard to tell. It is pretty hard for ARRMA to stuff up suspension. They've been doing it right for a very long time. For them to actually mess this up, it'll have to be a deliberate act, because they're actually very good at what they do when it comes to suspension setups. So it does feel good. Not gonna lie, it doesn't feel bouncy, it doesn't feel over dampened or anything like that. For something this size, the car feels just fine. Now, you're gonna notice that the body pins on this are attached a little bit differently from what we're used to seeing in the 1/8 scale and even 10 scale cars. Now, ARRMA have been attaching these body pins with these little rubber tethers. What did I say? Tethers? These little rubber things that hold the pins and stop you from losing them. What they've done here is they've added a little extra something that sits on top of the body. This protects the body a little bit. The pins are also a much heavier duty pin than what we're used to seeing. So they're a little bit thicker, a little bit harder to take in and out as well. And they've got these little plastic bits on top. which I think is a really good addition, and I'd love to see that in some of the other cars as well. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if it's even completely necessary, but it's good to see that idea evolving again with these cars. As I quickly take the body off, we'll show you some close-ups of this thing. It looks absolutely amazing. All right, so taking the body off here, you'll notice that there's a couple of like little plastic rails on top of the roofline. These rails are there obviously to add some protection to the body, but they also serve a bit of a double purpose because underneath there is this little roll cage that's kind of built into it. And this is actually really thick, like it's super thick stuff. Very, sorry, it's making a lot of noise because of the dangling body pins, but it's just really sturdy. And the idea, the way that this is shaped, it actually keys in to this center brace here, to this kind of like, it's kind of like a half roll cage, I guess you'd call it. And it keys into that, and when the body goes on, not only does it sit right on the actual body post itself, but that little cage kind of stops the body from sliding up and down or forwards and backwards on the actual car itself. So this is awesome because a lot of that stress, especially when you have nose landings and things like that, with all the flexing that goes on with this car, the body tends to shift backwards and forwards, and the holes tend to go elongated, the body kind of wrecks a little bit. Having this kind of helping prevent that from happening, that's a big positive. Now the body itself, as you can see, is all silver screen printed underneath. You've got your usual sort of plastic bits here protecting the body from rubbing anywhere on the car, and of course around the actual body post holes themselves. And then of course you've got the sticker there, "Don't just bash, blast," from ARRMA. The body thickness itself feels really nice. Feels a bit like your typical sort of outcast, notorious type of body. I don't think they could have gone too thick with it because then there's also a question of weight, there's a question of cost, and I've noticed that with some of these sticker bodies, yeah, they may not ding as much, but they can crack. Because the Lexan is so thick that it's to stop it from flexing so much, they start to tear and so forth. So there's a fine balance, and I have to say that the way that the body's constructed and all the lines that they've done here to give it a little bit of rigidity, it's a overall good design. And also it's vented on the back as well, just FYI. I might put it on this side because I'm running out of room there, and this is a really big body. All right, second time I'm going to bring this up to the camera because I do want to show you this thing. You can see how big it is. It's absolutely monstrous. This truck is unbelievable. It is so big, and it's quite heavy as well. So we've talked about suspension, we've talked about tires. Let's talk about this front bumper right here. I don't know if this is like an Easter egg or what's going on here with the front bumper, but there's a couple of extra holes. Maybe there's some attachments that you can get for the front bumper later on. Maybe they've done this for aftermarket companies to put their own stuff on it. I don't know, but that's an interesting thing regarding the front bumper. You'll notice as well that the shock towers on this are plastic. They're no longer aluminium. So this is a really kind of, I don't know, like a really dense composite plastic that's designed to be super tough, but also lighter than aluminium. Putting aluminium shock towers on here, number one, they would have to be really thick, and number two, if you didn't do them really thick, you'd have to do them like a CNC high grade aluminium shock tower, which would have cost quite a bit. I think going for this kind of option may have helped keep costs down, and to be honest, and obviously keep the weight down as well. And as long as they hold out, then what's the problem, right? So that's the I think that's the logic behind that. Body posts are adjustable front and rear, and of course we have these big beefy arms which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, but these things are definitely like upscaled in every way possible for you to actually, for these things to actually not break so much. I mean, even the steering knuckles, I'll give you a shot of what the typical steering knuckle is from an ARRMA Kraton compared to this thing. It just absolutely dwarfs it. Quite amazing. Another thing worth mentioning as well is the wheel itself the hub is lined in aluminium. So rather than just having the, a plastic molded hex, what the wheel basically goes onto the aluminium hub, the hub on the wheel is actually lined in aluminium, which is a really cool feature, and of course should help prevent the wheel from stripping out. Plus you got 24mm hexes, which gives you a lot of flat surface for the wheel to grip onto. I don't see this thing stripping out anytime soon. We've got aluminium reinforcements here on the end of each arm. Of course, we've got nice beefy, I think these drive shafts are like 5.5mm when I measured them, something like that. The steering links are also beefed up to like 5.5mm. I'll have all of this up on screen for you as well. And then of course, as we move along, we have the tower-to-tower braces. And the way that they've done these is a little bit different to what we're used to seeing. So traditionally with the the Kratons and the Outcasts and Talions and so forth, we have plastic chassis braces that go all the way into the center, and then you have your tower-to-tower brace that goes from obviously tower to tower. Here they've changed things up a little bit. So these lower braces don't actually go to the chassis themselves. They go to like a transmission case. Transmission case is super beefed up. It's absolutely huge as well, so that is going to help support and keep this chassis straight. In case you're wondering, the chassis itself is 4mm thick. So finally we have a thicker chassis on this car, which explains why it's actually quite a bit heavy as well. And we'll talk about a little bit more about the chassis a bit later on. Now the chassis braces and tower-to-tower brace, if you notice, they've actually got body pins holding them in place. So currently, with those other models, you have to take out these screws in order to remove these tower-to-tower braces. Right now, all you got to do is take out a body pin, and it's also tethered on as well, which is excellent. And away you go, you can remove the tower-to-tower braces. So I'm hoping that this might make its way into the 1/8 scale platforms, because that's a really good idea. It certainly helps keep maintenance times low in case you need to do any work on the cars. Then of course we have our motor, which has a massive built-in fan, by the way, not just any old fan. This thing's huge. So that guy is a 4685 1250 kV, capable of course of running up to 8S. We have our 160 amp firmer ESC, and buried underneath that is the 40 kilogram Spectrum servo, which has a very unique servo saver. I'm calling it like a barrel on the actual servo itself. So there's no longer a servo arm with a servo link or anything like that. This is actually going straight onto the servo itself. It has like a spring mechanism inside, which of course gives you the servo saver. The steering itself then goes off to a link, which then has a plastic arm that kind of sways from left to right, and of course that gives you your steering. Everything about this just looks super tough, super beefy. There's not a lot of aluminium in the center here, and I don't particularly disagree with that decision, because again, trying to keep weight down and avoiding going for cheap aluminium, which could potentially bend and just be a lost cause anyway. So I think going for something like this makes a little bit more sense to me. As we're moving along, we've got, of course, the sliding motor mount as per the 1/8 scale platforms. Obviously, this motor mount's a lot bigger than that, and it's designed a little bit differently for this particular car. You'll notice as well that the pinion and spur gear are actually much wider than what you'd find on the 1/8 scale cars. So there's a little bit more real estate for the teeth to grab onto, and less likely for them to break on such a big and powerful vehicle. Then of course we move on to the big sort of tower that's in the center here that helps support the body. And then on either side of that we have the battery trays. Now the battery trays a really cool design, because underneath there's a couple of screws that will allow you to expand these battery trays. So you can't just put, switch between different battery sizes. That's probably the only annoying thing. It's not something that you can do really easily, but it is easy enough as long as you've got a tool on site that you can adjust and obviously move those battery trays backwards and forwards. They do split in the middle, and of course the rear section slides up and down. And they've even given you an additional screw at the end of that for you to be able to put really long batteries in here if you want to. The battery straps themselves come with these like little pegs. I'm calling them pegs because they kind of look like pegs. This will allow you to, of course, keep wire management to keep it fairly tidy, I suppose. Hopefully they work. I haven't used them yet, so I'm hoping that this is a really good idea. Rather than having, what they did with the 1/8 scales, having this little sliding piece on the actual Velcro strap itself. This one is kind of like part of the loop, so it doesn't, I don't know, I think this might work okay. Now we do have a very long drive shaft here. I mean, for those of us who have got infractions and limitless, and we've been upgrading our drive shafts to stop that oscillating issue, this one here will no doubt have that sort of problem, but it's not going anywhere near as fast, so I don't know if it's going to even bother anybody. But no doubt there will be upgrade drive shafts for this later on down the line if you so choose to do that. Now these are a little bit more complicated because they are captured at one end. So it looks like they're like a CVD drive shaft type scenario. As we move on to the back end of the truck, we've got, of course, a real nice beefy rear bumper. I mean, the rear bumper on this is probably bigger than the front bumper on the current Kraton 6S. Yeah, this is definitely a very, very beefy bumper on the back, and of course you've got the whole diff housing and everything else. The diffs on this thing are absolutely ginormous compared to the 1/8 scale. And then last but not least, let's talk about the shocks just briefly, because I've kind of skipped on that. The shocks themselves are mammoth. Like, these things are huge. They dwarf the, I've actually got one of my rear shocks from my original Outcast, and I put it next to the front shock of this thing, and this just makes that shock look like it belongs on a 10 scale. So these are absolutely huge. The shafts themselves, I think, are 5mm thick. Now, they do have plastic shock caps, and I know that a lot of people are going to be twisting their nose at that a little bit. I say hold out, wait till you see some results. I don't see too much of an issue here, but let's see what happens. My Team Magic cars, for example, a lot of them come with plastic shock caps. I'm yet to see one of those pop a shock cap off. If they're done right, if the plastic is done correctly, and the thread's done right, and all those sorts of things, they really shouldn't be an issue. So we'll see how that goes. But again, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to be twisting their nose at that. Anyway, moving on, we've got these big guards on either side of the car, or on either side of the chassis as well. And you notice one of the guards has actually got a little hole in it where the motor side is. That hole is for you to put your little Allen key in there and remove the pinion. So if you do want to change out gears, well, you can do that without having to remove this entire side guard, because ARRMA have actually thought about this and put a little hole in there for us to take out the pinion. So pretty cool. This does come with IC5 connectors. Unfortunately, I don't have any Spectrum 4S batteries to use on here, and of course I use XT150s, so these guys are going to have to go. I will get some telemetry on my radio from this ESC, but unfortunately, yeah, I won't be using these connectors. I know that there might be other people out there that are doing reviews for this that will use those batteries and those connectors, and they can give you feedback on how that works, but unfortunately not for me at this stage. All right, let's flip the car over here and let's talk about the underside of this chassis. Looks absolutely amazing. Like, they did to this what they did to the special edition Outcast that you see on the shelf up there. They etched the chassis underneath. Just a nice little subtle touch, something that's a little bit unique. And of course, to protect that chassis, you've got the front bumper which wraps around the nose of the chassis here, and it sticks out quite a fair bit. Same with the rear bumper. And then you've also got these little skid sort of, I don't know what you call them, like little skid plates maybe, that go on the front and rear of the chassis here, and that helps prevent the chassis from getting all scratched up. Unfortunately, I drive on gravel. With the jumping that I do, I think I'm going to scratch this chassis regardless. Now, you'll notice that this is a pressed chassis, right? It's molded. It has these ridges on here, and you might be thinking, my God, why did they do that? Now, I haven't actually got an official reason why this was done. This is just my brain thinking. By doing this, you create stiffness in the chassis because you're creating vertical lines, and that should help give the chassis a little bit of extra stiffness. So not only is it 4 mil thick, and it's braced with aluminium braces and all of those sorts of things to help keep the chassis nice and straight, but they've actually engineered the chassis in a way that itself will help keep it straight. And I think that's really cool. Now you'll notice that there's also a little slot here for the motor mount. Now this is not so much for the motor mount itself. This is the mount that's on the motor that slides up and down the motor mount, if that makes a bit of sense. So if you do need to remove the motor for whatever reason, you need to take that screw out. There is a screw on top of the motor locking it in place. This is for gear meshing and so forth. And then the other one is underneath. And that's what this little slot here is for. My only concern is getting dirt and grime getting caught up in that little hole. And if you ever need to remove it, that might be a little bit tricky to do that. But as long as you try to keep it clean, keep that in mind that it's there. It's a little cavity that's obviously going to attract a little bit of dirt and dust. I think for the most part we should be okay. While we got the car on its side here, let's talk about these A-arms. These things are just huge, all right? I don't know if it really comes through on camera. I tried to film this in a way that it will actually translate on camera, just to sort of illustrate how big these arms and how beefy they are as well. Yeah, they're done in a way where they're not completely flat. You'll notice that the bottom section where the shocks attach, it's flat to the bottom of the arm, but then it kind of raises up where the sway bar is due to fit in. And then it's kind of like, yeah, I think it's designed specifically like that to maybe give it a little bit extra strength. And it's the same thing on the rear arms as well. Now, I will say I don't see droop screws installed here, but there are provisions on the arms for them. So I'm assuming that you might be able to get those later on, the little droop screws. And I think that's pretty much it. Oh, and before we forget, the wing mount. The wing mount and the wing itself, the wing has a little bit of flex, and as does the mount. And it does look pretty decent, looks pretty beefy to me. So I don't know, maybe a couple of landings this thing might start to tear apart, or maybe it's really tough enough that it can take a few hits. The way that the wing is mounted on here as well is non-adjustable, as far as I could tell. No, it's non-adjustable, but it does look like, yeah, it's pretty well built. And there's all these like little touches, right? There's all these little subtle things that I really like about this car. Like for example, the spring retainers. They have these little kind of, I don't know, you call them like fingers to hold the spring in place so it doesn't pop out of place on that spring retainer. You know, just little things like that make a little bit of a difference. You know, the attention to detail in providing a tool for you to remove that C-clip that's buried in front of the bearing of the center drive shafts, for example. So, you know, that's a nice little addition to have, something that you might need to keep in your toolbox in case you ever need to use it. And then you've got, you know, like the little pegs that I was talking about that on the Velcro straps for the battery for wire management. Introducing the little body pins on the tower-to-tower braces, so it makes it nice and easy to remove these braces rather than sitting here trying to disassemble more parts and getting wheels out of the way and things like that I've had to do in the past to get to a screw just to remove a tower. This is again another step forward, I think, for the brand and for these types of vehicles. There's a lot of little things like that as you look at this car, it kind of makes you realize that they've actually thought about this, and that's something that ARRMA have always been known to do. And this is one of the reasons why I really like unboxing their vehicles and reviewing their vehicles is because of these things, because you get to see the evolution and the steps forward that they take with their cars. Really, really good to see this. I'm so pumped to have my hands on one. I cannot be thankful enough. Thank you, Horizon and ARRMA, for everything. Yeah, what can I say? This thing is an absolute work of art, much like what they did with the Nero platform back in the day. This car, no doubt, is going to turn a lot of heads. It's going to It's gonna fly, that's what it's gonna do, because I'm really hoping to drive this thing. I'm actually planning to go out tomorrow and give this thing a proper bash, so keep an eye out for the running video. I'll have that up on the channel very, very shortly, and we'll get to see this thing bash and see how fast it is and all that sort of thing. So I'm gonna leave this unboxing here. If you have any questions about this car, if there's anything that I've missed or skimped over that I haven't covered, by all means, please leave me a comment in the comment section below. I'll try and get back to you as best as I can and as quickly as I can. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed this unboxing and first look at the new ARRMA Kraton 8S. It is finally here, and I couldn't be happier. Thank you all very much for watching. Check the video description for more links on the car, as well as links to my social media pages, and I'll be speaking to you all next time. Just before we go, guys, I was getting this car ready to go out for a bash, and I noticed that there was this little cutout here on the corner of this plastic, and it's actually attached with the screw at the bottom there. And I didn't know what it was for. I couldn't really see what it was for. And of course you can see you can sort of push it in a bit. So I contacted ARRMA, and apparently this is for those of us out there who are going to be swapping out this motor for something of a longer cam. You remove this slot and it allows you to slide the motor out of the car without having to remove the entire side wall. At least that's my understanding of it based on how they explained it. So again, another little clever idea, just to, you know, one of these things where the more you explore on this car, the more of these little types of touches that you'll find that ARRMA have done. It's really quite amazing.